Are we live? That's great. I can't. So welcome everyone. Welcome to poetryEast. Really, really good. I'm starting to see people come in from the chat box. Do you want to sit yourself down? Yeah, it's really good to see. Oh, Michael Schmidt's here, so that's really great. I really love it to see the chat box filling up like this. Yeah, so welcome to everyone. Welcome to poetryEast. Really good to have you here at the London Buddhist Centre. This is only the second live poetryEast, YouTube poetryEast we've run at the London Buddhist Centre. Normally we run poetryEast, I don't know, six times or so a year. We've had Anthony Gormley, we've had Jory Graham, we've had Mark Doty, we've had Michael Longley, we've had Com Toybin. But now, yeah, it's very exciting to be able to go online. Recently, I was interviewing Sigrid Nunez about her National Book Award novel, The Friend, which was a wonderful novel. I'd really recommend it. But tonight, we've got a really exciting evening. I'm going to be interviewing the poet, Dan Burt. I'm going to have to be careful with this interview because Dan's life is so exciting. It's so, well, exciting is too trivial a word. It's so remarkable, actually, that it'd be only too tempting for me to spend too long talking about his life. And I also want to talk about his poetry, obviously. So just to say, perhaps for those of you, especially welcome to anyone that's new to poetryEast. Really, really good if you're new to poetryEast online or in live. So welcome to you. Welcome to anyone who's new to poetry. I recently led a meditation course, and somebody on the course said they really loved the course, they really enjoyed it, but they really don't like poetry. And I was saying, well, you're not alone. So one of my intentions with poetryEast is to help people understand poetry, help people see its human value. My own teacher, the founder of the London Buddhist Centre, the founder of Triratna Buddhist Order and Movement, he once said that if you were to look for a precedent to Buddhism in the West, you'd find it in our artistic tradition, not in our religious tradition. Subramanian, can I just get you to? I'm getting a bit distracted. Okay. Yeah, you'd find the background of Buddhism in our literary tradition and in our artistic tradition, not in our religious tradition. Buddhism is more like a poem or a work of art than it is like a Catholic service. Yeah. So that's why we have poetryEast here at the London Buddhist Centre. So yes, welcome to everyone. I was first introduced to Dan Burt's poetry by his publisher at Carcanet, Michael Schmidt. He wrote to me, he said, look, I'd really recommend his work. So I got the books. And the thing that struck me about his poetry, the first thing that strikes me is its passion, even at times sort of brutality of language. Dan certainly doesn't mince his words, not in any way. But you get this passion and this almost ferocity and brutality at times, and we'll be talking about that. You get that married to lyric form, and that's what really excited me about his work. This instinct for truth, but also this very, very deep feeling for poetry. So I'm really, really delighted to be talking to Dan Burt this evening. So welcome, Dan. Are you there? He doesn't seem to be there. Hello, Dan. Oh, he's just, every interview I've ever done, or every meeting I've been in with Zoom, and everyone's on Zoom at the moment, aren't they? You have that sort of moment where someone's leaning forward to unmute themselves. So, Dan, I think you need to unmute yourself. Are you there?
Minute we get, okay.
Ah, there you are, great.
There you are, how's that?
That's great.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm excited to do something I've never done before.
Yeah, that's great.
An online interview and poetry reading.
That's great. That's really great. So I wanted to start, Dan, I wanted to sort of pitch straight in with saying, you quote, the two books of poetry that I've been reading, this wonderful We Look at This, and then your most recent book, Salvage, Twilight, that both of them have prose sections in them, wonderful prose sections. And in one of them, you quote Yeats, or you use Yeats, and you say, I believed one lyric poem that passed into the memory of the race justifies a life. And I thought I'd start with why do you believe that? That you believe that creating one lyric poem that enters the memory of the race justifies life?
Because nothing in my life has been more important, because a poem that does enter the memory of the race contains, for me, and by definition, it seems to me, if the species remember it, the race remembers it, contains a truth accessible to the tribe and far beyond it. And I have, fortunately or unfortunately, been through a number of worlds, social classes, and I've experienced much of what most people in the world think of as the good life, or anything money can buy you, which all has...
You've been a successful lawyer, haven't you?
Sorry?
You've been a very successful lawyer.
Well, I had a bit of luck as a lawyer and investment banker, but more to the point, I found it all a waste of breath. It seemed, another line from Yeats, it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. While it's satisfying to live amidst beauty, which is why I wanted the material success I had, it didn't change my world. It didn't change the way I look at the world. And to be able to do that, and if you're interested in having any life beyond your own, a work of art that endures does that. So for those reasons, I've never had a doubt. When I first learned about literature, and I came to it late, I came to poetry, and I came to the world of the mind when I was 18 or 19 years old. And the excitement, this shock of reading Wordsworth, I can remember the experience of reading Tintern Abbey, and the depth of understanding that he'd offered or promised. Nothing else could do that. And the life of the mind seemed to me the only thing really worth struggling for.
That's wonderful.
So I've been lucky I had a bit of time to do it.
Yeah, so we'll come back to the life of the mind in a moment, but again, in one of your prose sections, you talk about lust, rage, and the dream of writing well. So we'll come to lust in a minute, but I thought we'd start with rage, if that's all right.
Sure.
So I wanted to ask, you write, again, in one of these prose sections about being a child and singing Silent Night, coming home and singing Silent Night, I think. And I wanted to start with the rage of in your childhood. I wondered whether you'd just tell us about that experience as a child.
Sure. And in fact, the book, the collection I'm going to read from, Salvage and Twilight, is all about rage and salvation. The experience you're talking about was, I was about 9 or 10 years old. My father and my grandfather had come from, we called it the old country, from a shtetl outside of Kiev. And all of his family had been killed in a pogrom in 1920 by the Reds, by Cossacks. And we were using the Civil War as an excuse to do what they enjoyed doing, which was killing Jews. And I learned Silent Night at school. I went to a state school, working class state school. And I came up the back steps singing Silent Night. My grandfather, who was dying, he died a few months later, he was dying of cancer, was sitting at the kitchen table. And I walked in and he said, I was singing, he said in Yiddish, Daniel, shush still. Danny, shut up. And I said, I had a normal reaction. I said, no, what do you mean? And he suddenly flushed. The life force came back to him. He grabbed me by the neck and shook me. My father pulled him off, and then they sat me down. Pop, my grandfather, Pop Zeta, at the head of the table, and me on his right. And he told me how he had learned how his entire family had been wiped out, and that was the Cossacks came. His father, who was what they called a Malamed or a learner, was offered a shelter under the street, a hideout, and he said, "No, God will protect us." And of course, they took the family, 19 of them, shot raped the women in front of the men, shot the women and the children. And the story and the experience stayed with me, as it would when you were 9 years old. And of course, his rage was frightening. And my father, who was a semi-pro boxer, would fly off the handle at a moment's notice, and he'd beat you, or he'd hit you. Well, he'd punch you. He was a pretty good boxer too. And then the thing that really started me off and made me so angry, as I realized later, was that at 12 and a half, I was put into the butcher shop to work. And it was a real job, and I worked in the butcher shop. By the time I was 16, I was working 40 hours a week, going to high school, not doing terribly well. And what would have been a normal life, the after school gatherings, socializing, dances, none of that was available. I would get one night a week off on Saturday night. And so you were cut off from the other boys at your school, cut off. If you were going to see a girl, and I like girls, you had to really work at it, because you couldn't see them on a Friday night, you couldn't see them during the week. And that built up a great deal of anger. And I had a younger brother who had a very different background with my mother. Parents had drawn up sides. My mother protected him. And as I began to realize what was going on, I grew angrier and angrier.
Yeah.
And it stayed with me. And I'm going to read about that. And I'm going to read about what was left. And I'm going to read about how that rage disappeared.
And I wanted to say a little bit more as well about your background. We'll move. The danger with you, Dan, is that your story is so. You've got such a story. You're almost the opposite of Wallace Stevens. They say he had an anecdote-proof life, whereas you've got more anecdotes. Like, for instance, I wanted to introduce people to your Uncle Al, that seems to have been a hitman.
He was.
Right. Yeah.
He was. Would you like me to read a few sentences from that? Or?
Yes, do. Yes. Yeah.
All right, and I thought you might. Everybody likes Uncle Al. I should tell you that at my college, at St. John's at Cambridge, he's become a shibboleth. If you're in a tight meeting where some part of the college isn't doing what some senior member wants it to do, that member will say, you know, what I really need now is Uncle Al to sort this out. So let's see. I don't want to read too much. Well, actually, rather than read it, better to talk about it. Uncle Al was my mother's brother, my only maternal uncle. And he was a proper hitman. And I never saw him without a gun. So he'd walk in the house, and the first thing he'd do was unholster, or take off his holster and belt, wrap the belt around the gun, and put the gun up on a credenza where the children couldn't reach it, the young people. And Al was always quiet, didn't curse as much as my father at all, and he never got angry. I was in his house, I was visiting on a Sunday morning when they arrested him for murder, attempted murder. A guy named Billy Meade, who'd been a prominent politician, corrupt politician in Philadelphia, had been shot on a Saturday night in an after-hours club that my mother's family ran. And the shooter had stood on a milk crate, upended milk crate, knocked on the door. There was a porthole that was slid aside. The shooter stuck a gun through the porthole, and interestingly enough, knew exactly where on the long bar this guy, Billy Meade, would be standing. And so they arrested Al. He was tried, and he was not convicted. He was acquitted because they never found the murder weapon. And his wife, my Aunt Babe, that was her name, Babe, she swore that he was in bed with her. Now, that was a complete lie, because Albert had been living for years with his mistress. And Babe had hidden the gun. And Babe told me this at Albert's funeral. And she said, you know, your uncle was the real tough guy. And she said, when they arrested him, he called, he said, now, they're going to come to the house, and you're going to have to let him in. And have you taken care of that thing I told you to take care of? She said, yes. And she had taken the gun and hidden it. And years later, they sold it at a gun auction, and the gun auctioneer asked about it. But Uncle Al was the real thing. He'd kill her. And he was the protector. He was a corrupt cop, and he was a protector on the police side for Angelo Bruno, the Gentle Don, as he's called. And you can read about Angelo. Go to Google. And these were the people I knew growing up. My father did everything he could to keep us away from that family. And none of the children, my peers, went to even college, let alone university. And my eldest cousin, Anita, died of a drug overdose at 42. It was a fairly rough group.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there's so much to talk about from all of that time. I mean, you seem very poor. You know, a tough old time from your writing in South Philadelphia, working in the butcher's shop, your father's rages. Your mother seemed to have been part of the mafia herself, or I don't know whether that's a slur on your mother.
No, my mother was basically a mafia princess. Her mother, who was from Italy, her mother died when she was 2 in the influenza epidemic in 1918, one before this. And she was raised by her grandmother from the old country, who owned a candy store. And the candy store was the kind you'd seen in the movies, and that was where the bets were placed, transactions were taken care of, people settled up debts on Monday night. And my mother, the first 13 years of her life, from 2 to the age of 13, were spent with that woman raising her. And those were the attitudes she had. So I've written about her. There was this boy that was, when I was 5 years old, we moved to a new neighborhood, and a local boy was terrorizing me. And I ran into the house. My mother looked at me and said, "Go back out." She dragged me down the back steps. I said, "I can't fight him. He's there with his friends and they'll jump me." And she went down with a broom, stood there, kept the others away, and made me fight the kid. Now, that's useful if you're going to be a Navy SEAL. I'm not sure it does much for affection or relying on the mother. And I never did. I didn't like her. I was not sad that she died. And I'm not sad today. And she basically didn't care. Over to you. I don't want to go on too much about with these stories because I know there are a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories, and they're all of them. I mean, good heavens, they're wonderful stories, and they're very tempting to carry on with. I did want to just touch on one more story from your life before we start to talk about your writing. Sure. I was really struck by your experience of the first time you heard the Moonlight Sonata. It's kind of an awakening, it seemed, for you. I wonder whether you say a little bit about that, and then I will talk.
Of course. So I was a tough. I was a teenage tough. I'd gone to a school for what we call a magnet school today for bright kids because they took IQ tests and I had done well in the IQ test. That was the only thing I'd done well in. And I didn't fit in the school, and I fought all the time. So the first 2 years I did very poorly, relatively poorly. And what I'll be reading about later is I met this girl and she changed. She showed me a world I'd never seen. She was an upper middle class girl, and all sorts of things I'd never seen. And I realized I loved them and I could talk to her. So I thought, right, I better try to go to college. And one of my high school teachers who had taken an interest in me got me into a college. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone into it. And I thought, right, it's the summer of 1960. I'm going to go to college. And if I screw this up, it's game over. I'm going to be a butcher. And I assure you, being a butcher is no fun, particularly not the way we did it. So I decided I'd better learn about the things that educated people learn about. And I didn't know what they learned about, but it occurred to me that classical music must be one of them. So I would turn on the radio, I tuned it to the classical music station and would listen. And I listened for weeks and it didn't make any sense to me. And one Saturday morning, I was driving to the packing house to pick up a load of hindquarters. If you've seen this new film, with Robert De Niro and all, it's part of it is it's really.
The Irishman?
Sorry?
The Irishman.
Yes, The Irish, exactly. Well, that's a home movie. The packing houses, the packing house they show you looks like one of the ones I used to go to. And I was going to pick up one of those hindquarters, a number of those hindquarters of beef. And I'm in the equivalent of a battered white van. And on the radio comes the first few notes, that dying fall of the Moonlight Sonata. And I heard it. I suddenly understood it. I have a recollection that my eyes filled with tears. And suddenly an entire world opened up to me. A world that wasn't brutal, that wasn't cheap, that wasn't tawdry. And why, you asked at the beginning, why do I think one lyric poet that passes into the memory of the race poem justifies a life? Because it can take someone, as those three notes did, out of the world that I knew, which was simply a rougher version of the world we see around us. And I find that I don't believe in salvation. I don't believe in Christianity for sure. But I do believe in civilizing. And those three notes began to civilize me. I mean, I could manage very well in a fight, but that was such a terribly limited world. That's the story of the Moonlight Sonata.
That's wonderful.
I still listen to it. I bought the record, and I can see the record jacket before me, and I still have that record with the record jacket. Rudolf Serkin was playing piano.
Right. And let's move on to the writing, because it's so easy to talk so much about your life, Dan, that I can get too excited. But I thought actually we'd just jump right the way forward and say a little bit about how you came to be published, because my sense of your I want to say quite a bit more about the writing in a moment. But how did you come to be published? Because there's a sense of you writing, for about 46 years on your own, whilst you're working very, very long hours, very hard. How did you come to be publishing poetry then?
Right. Well, I owe the publication itself to Michael Schmidt, and indeed to the first competent editing. I've been making notes over the years, and from the time I left, from the time I began to think, I'd been making drafts of poems, making notes. I had piles and piles of notes, but never thought I had anything really to say. And finally, I got to the point where and this was in 2006 or 7, I'd had a couple of businesses, law firms. I certainly didn't need any more money. I started to spend more time trying to see if I couldn't write a little better. And I finished a piece, a landscape piece that I thought was good enough to engrave on a stela that I would put on the grounds of a property that I own in Maine. So I found a letter artist named Stephen Raw. He had an exhibition at Goldsmiths. I saw the exhibition, liked it, called him up, said, would you take a commission to design the typeface, the lettering? He said yes. I sent him the poem. He came back after about a month, liked what he did. And then he said to me, I said, fine, go ahead. And then he said, by the way, my wife really liked that poem. And she should know, I do all the covers for Carcanet Press. Do you have any more? And if so, would you mind if I showed them to Michael Schmidt? So I said, well, I have a few more that I think are worth at least looking at. And I sent them to Steve, and he showed them to Michael. And Michael was, I don't think, overly impressed. And then 6 months later, he came back and he said, right, I want to publish you in PN Review. And so they then published me, and then I put out a chapbook, and on it went. So without Michael, it wouldn't have happened. And without Stephen Raw, it wouldn't have happened. I cared too much about poetry to dare risk my ego trying to get published and getting rejected. I would never have done it had that accident not occurred. Because everything else I've done didn't matter. None of it mattered. I'd been a public figure in America, been on the evening news and all that crap, and I didn't care about it at all. But writing a decent poem, oh yeah, that's something I care. And if I couldn't do that, that would have been an absolutely crushing blow. Now, not to say that I'm a first-class writer or poet, but I do avoid being ridiculed, which is good enough.
So let's talk more about the poetry itself. I mean, reading it, and we've talked about a bit about this on the phone. It's almost like there's a sense of you of being an outsider artist. It's a bit weird thing to say because you don't usually say that. You usually say that of prisoners and the insane, and you're neither. But there's a sense of almost outsider art. At least that's how it comes across. There's no irony in the poems. There's no tricks. There's no cleverness and obscurity. There's no distancing. There's this almost savage desire to tell the truth. I don't know whether that rings any bells for you, but there's almost a sense of sort of outside art, that you've been almost totally outside the poetry scene and haven't learnt its ways in a certain sort of way, at least the contemporary scene.
Well, you've got it exactly right. The phrase, a savage desire to tell the truth. I wish I'd thought of it for a blurb for a book, but that's exactly what I want to do. In terms of being an outsider, that's been my life, not consciously. It's just how I grew up. My father was a borderline sociopath. Sometimes he crossed the line. I grew up indifferent to what people thought of me. I cared about results, and if I was good enough at the things I did, I could get the results. I mean, there was never a client who liked me, but they paid me, and it seemed to me that was the deal. When you go through my work, there's a lot of references to the English tradition, but I hope that they're very almost organically a part of the poem. And as for what is customary poetry today, no, I've had no courses. I wasn't interested. All I was interested in was getting as simple a statement. I want to get as close to the raw truth in words, in memorable language as I can. That's what it strikes me as poetry is. I'd love to do in one or two poems what Auerbach has done his entire career. Mm-hmm. And Auerbach is also not very fashionable. Mm.
It's really striking reading the poems that, I thought I could see Larkin in the poems, Larkin's intention to tell the truth. I could see Yeats, I could see Lowell, but I couldn't see Ashbery.
No, because I have read Ashbery, but it doesn't mean much to me. I've read the French symbolists, but the world they're striving for, it seems to me a mystical world, I don't believe exists. I believe much more in the concrete, and that truth is buried in the physical realities and emotions that you experience on a daily basis. I also haven't done drugs. I never enjoyed them, so I didn't bother. And I say this with the greatest respect, since I'm being interviewed by a Buddhist for a Buddhist poetry center or a Buddhist center. And I recognize that perhaps I may sound a bit too materialistic here, or too physical.
I mean, one of the things, just to carry on this thought about you being an outsider artist, which I must say I'm rather taken by. You're a very unusual outsider, and I think there is something in you being an outsider artist. I think part of that is this commitment to form. There is this savage desire to tell the truth, and you're unflinching in that in the poems and in the prose. And that's wedded with this, well, for me, something very heartening. I still believe in redemption through form. And I have a feeling that you believe in that your commitment to form is another thing that steps you outside of the poetry scene.
Well, I'm not good at scenes, at least not not the social kind, and I've always thought that form is salvational. It's the way through to the heart of an experience, to the raw truth, and it disciplines you. And that discipline, I believe, is essential if you're going to write seriously and try to explore the world, the core of the world around you. Fundamentally, I don't write for anyone other than myself. Fortunately, although I started far too late to get serious about it, but I don't do this, I don't have to make a living from it, though it's the most important thing in my life, and I work at it harder than I have in anything else. But I work at these things, and you'll see it in the poems I read tonight, I hope. I work at a poem to understand what's happened to me in the first analysis, what really occurred, and to get to that core and truth requires, for me, the discipline of form, because it forces you to concentrate enormously hard on the right word, on the balance of the word, on the sound, on all the parts of a sentence that make it memorable. And if you think about what I would say is an analog or an analogy, analogous, is the way, again, Auerbach paints. I know Auerbach. I own Auerbach's. And his production is very limited. And every morning he comes into the studio and he scrapes off what he did the night before. And he's looking for, and it's his phrase, the raw truth in a sitter. And that truth of character is inexhaustible. He's got his oeuvre is composed of, by and large, 8 or 9 of the same sitters over 60 years. But he works at getting to the core of them, and he does it with discipline, practice. I mean, he knows the classical disciplines very well, but you can't see them in his work.
Indeed. Let's talk a bit more about some of the poems themselves, because we've not yet managed to get onto those. I was particularly struck in Salvage at Twilight, which, and again, it's interesting reading your collections, Dan, because they move between poetry and prose, a little bit like Lowell's life studies. That slightly reminds me of him. I wanted to talk about deposition. This very short sequence near the end goes back to lust, and it goes back to your sweetheart that you mentioned earlier on. Much later, I wonder whether you could say a little bit about deposition.
Sure. And I had planned, as you know, to read that tonight. When I was 16 and a half, I met this girl, Jill Rubinson, and I was intensely in love with her. And we dated briefly, and for her quite casually, for a few months. Her father didn't want her to see me because I was a boy with sawdust in my cuffs, and he wasn't having any of that. And after she had her dalliance with a bit of rough, she went on her way to Cornell and to Harvard, and I heard nothing of her or from her for 50 years. And then, by the purest of chance, I came across her name again. And the way it happened was my sister had gotten interested in genealogy and wanted my assistance, and had sent me, as an example of a website she wanted to set up for the family, some family's website. And I didn't pay attention to it when I received it. Months later, I was cleaning out my stack of papers. I printed out the website, and I came across it again. I glanced at it, and on a cadet tree, bound with this family's name I didn't know, was a name I certainly did know, and that was Jo Rubenson. And it said she was living and teaching at the University of Augusta, Maine, University of Maine, Augusta campus, about 2 hours from my main house in Maine on the coast. So I called her up. She came to lunch. That wasn't an overwhelming success because I was so angry still. And then she came back about 6 months later. And then I got to know her and knew her, came to know her very, very well. We became very close. And she then got cancer about 8 years later. And I was with her during the cancer. And then she died. And the deposition is about that experience of being with her during her cancer and what she did to me, for me. And the last poem I'll read tonight is a poem called Bequest, which is, which deals with what she left me. Does that cover the position?
Yeah, that's just great. You know, I do everybody make sure you stay for, we're going to have a tea break in a moment, and then we always have a tea break. Everything we do at the London Buddhist Centre, we have a tea break, and we're even having a virtual tea break.
Yeah, I make one mistake with this. One thing,
yeah, I do, yeah.
The way I write that I should have mentioned. You mentioned the simplicity and the hardness. LeVar, can you check this? It's come off again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, because it's done something here. LeVar is going to fix it now. There we go. What I aim for in a poem is to convey the experience as close to the reader insofar as possible that I actually had, how I actually felt. And so I constantly strip away and use these hard words, harsh words, so that the reader is sometimes set back and hopefully get some sense of what I experienced. And you'll see that in deposition.
Yeah, indeed. So I want to ask you one more question before we have a short break. I always want to ask this question, which is, you know, talking to you, Dan, we really see why you write. It's a passion for you. I can see that, and we've talked about redemption through form and so on. And I feel a lot of, you know, I chime with that. I wonder if you could say something about why should people read poetry? It's like you start to wonder: is poetry a dead form? By poetry, I don't mean just unjustified lines on a page, but poetry as you've read Yeats and Lowell and so on. Is poetry a dead form? What can it do for people? You know, we're in difficult times just now in the world, and you know, where we'll go, we don't know. What can poetry? I mean, it's a big question, I know, but what can poetry offer? Can it still offer?
I believe
Wordsworth offered you when you first read him.
I believe it's it humanizes. It's the most portable form of humanization available, and that it is a force for morality, the best of it, and that humanizing force is the only stay you have against chaos and animality, the kinds of world that we're dealing with today. This is the worst period in my life. Donald Trump has kept me out. I can't think of anything more terrifying than a country with America's power, military power, and economic power being run by that kind of person, that kind of inhumane animal. And I believe poetry is a stay against that. As is all art. It's just another form. And you know, types of art wax and wane. There are lots of dead ends. You think about Victorian painting, about which I've had lots of debates with some of the people in this country. But it's by and large, you know, that was a pretty fallow period.
Indeed.
Great stuff. You go to the Frick Museum and you look at the Fritz or Rembrandt's late self-portrait. And it'll never leave you. And when the world is very, very dark, some of the lines that I recall that come back to me when Joe Rubinson died, some of what we used to read together was the only thing I could think of to have run through my mind. And they were lines from the Nations Ode. Very well known. So I don't think poetry is a dead form. If I have a faith, that's it.
That's great. I think that's a really good point to pause for a moment then, Dan. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. So we're going to just have a few minutes break. I think a friend of mine is going to come down with a saxophone and play to us. Here he is, just to reassure you that we're here. So you can have a break now, Dan, and then we'll come back in a few minutes' time, in about 8 minutes' time, and I'll kick us off again, and I'll hand over to you to read your poetry, Dan.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, you want to put me on? Yeah. That'll work.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. I live with Matt upstairs in the community that we live together. Just lovely.
I enjoyed listening to that.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it?
No, he's very good.
He's very good. He's very good. Well, I don't want to say very much, just to hand over to you now, Dan, to read your poem. So let's just go straight over to you and let's hear
Okay, is that as volume as high as it gets? I'm just checking on volume. Okay. All right. So it's over to me now.
Over to you now. Yeah. I
Right.
was going to do a bit of an introduction, but I think our interview has been enough of an introduction. So
Fine. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm going to read 10 short pieces. They deal with some of the things we've been talking about, and the rage and how it came to abate, be banished. The first poem is called Thief. I mentioned I was put to work at 12 and a half in the butcher shop. Thief. Dad taught me to steal when I turned 12. In white apron over butcher's coat, hiked up a foot to clear the sawdust floor, pencil stub on trussing twine dangling from the buttonhole. Boyhood snatched and left behind, I was hammered into a counterman. Smile, say, help you, man? But give her odd weight. Even's too easy to calculate. And add 5% to every sale, or the change will eat our lunch. Long ago, I forgave his lies that made me a thief so he could buy a Jersey skiff, flash a 2-inch roll, and Mondays after Schwitz, visit his troll. But the customers don't pardon me. Should brandy, politician, fellow praise, service I rendered, a building raised. Once more across the counter, shoppers stand, empty bags in outstretched hands. Blondie, with her 7 ragged kids, street sweepers, dailies, handymen, discount coupons crumpled in their fists. The working or redundant poor I stole from weekly at his store. Stare, point, till I turn aside, crimson, drop my eyes, and they convert laudation that should shrive me into dirt. This next poem is called Traitor. And it's about renouncing my citizenship. I emigrated from America in 1994, in part because I didn't want to have my daughter educated in the United States. And in 2005, gave up my citizenship. Now, it's not common, more common now. And the Americans make a big deal of it. You've got to go in, be seen by a consular official. You've got to swear you'll never come back. It's a real circus. What they're really looking for is, are you in your right mind? They'll tell you this if you ask them. They can't believe anyone would want to give up American citizenship. I'm telling you the truth. And in my case, because I had been a public figure in America, was known a bit, I got the consul himself who interviewed me. Traitor. The epigraph is from Stefan Zweig's The World of Yesterday. For even life in exile is not as bad as life alone in one's own country. 2-ton eagle above the stairs, soldiers cradling M16s, flags everywhere, the consul's why? The oath I swear to absolutely and entirely renounce my nationality. Murmured traitor as I stand, canceled blue passport in hand, a gray-haired alien on foreign land. 40 years doubts brewed in me about Yankee Doodle verities poured into us as kids, corroded loyalty to hostility, and left no choice at last but quit the homeland I never fit. I feel no remorse, but wonder nonetheless how Dreyfus felt. Brace in the square at l'École Militaire, sword snapped, disgraced, reviled for what he did not do, though faith, not fury, stood him askew. Next, I'm going to read a short prose passage from the memoir I did called, first appeared in something called Certain Windows, and then was published as You Think It's Strange. Kindled. Even bad boys fall in love. It happened to me 60 years ago. Jill Rubinson stood in a corner of the den, slightly to the left of the fireplace, before a wall of books in her parents' split-level suburban house on a third of an acre of grass in a costly post-war subdivision in Lower Merion. Her living room could have swallowed 3 of mine. As you entered, it was anchored on the left by a second ceramic fireplace, on the right by a grand piano. Opposite the front door, another wall of books. When you turned onto the subdivision's entrance road, on the right-hand verge, a sign atop a 7-foot-high steel pole warned, "No commercial vehicles allowed." The levels were unsplit in the homes I knew. The walls bookless, no hearths, no dens. Their lawns were small green chin whiskers, 2 bricks' length narrower than the houses they bearded, no deeper than the setback from the pavement, normally 15 feet. Backyards, if any, were paved. I had never been in a house that was too far from neighbors to hear them quarrel, and I had never seen a girl like Jill. She had a gammon air, just 5 feet tall, thin, flat-chested, with a bump on her nose, a fingertips width below its juncture with the skull. Head large for her body, high forehead and cheekbones, skin Celtic pale. No Gisela Bündchen then, but come hither cute. Sapphire blue eyes, her strongest feature, confirmed that maternal German Jewish genes had vanquished her father's from the Southern Pale. Her hair pulled back in a short, bouncy ponytail, suited the clothes below. Bobby socks, plaid wrap skirt, cotton shirt, all in shades of purple. The skirt sides clamped shut, just below the left thigh, with a 6-inch decorative brass-plated safety pin. Her taut body fit the cheerleader she was, but her airs, clothes, cheerleading, and no doubt padded bra were protective teenage coloration. She was her superior public high school's best student, soon to be class valedictorian, who would graduate Phi Beta Kappa from Cornell and take her PhD in English literature from Harvard. Though the den was filled with noisy teenagers flirting, dancing the twist, shouting in clumps and couples, she stood alone, inviolable, above us all, as if on an altar, a cleared space around her in the gaggle, a Jewish virgin princess, sceptered by right. Academic ineptitude threw us together, mine not hers. I had begun prowling around with boys from Overbrook High, met in summer school during my second remedial high school summer. Their neighborhood was Overbrook Park, a small, lower middle class Jewish neighborhood of post-war row homes, 20-minute walk from Jill's house across City Line Avenue, the other side of the tracks. Her 15-year-old suburban girlfriends were experimenting with social and academic inferiors and persuaded Jill to host a rare Saturday night party for them. I joined the 5 Overbrook boys who turned up. None of us knew Jill or had been to her house. I walked the 3 steps down to the den, stared across the room, met Jill's eyes, and was felled. Who's there say? Michael Corleone's first sighting of Apollonia across the Sicilian field. Enzio Pinza, an operatic bass of the period, was singing Some Enchanted Evening, a popular song from South Pacific, on a 45 RPM record player. I misheard its first lines. Some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger, as one enchanted evening, you will meet a stranger. But this was that evening, and have misremembered those lines ever since. Jill was somewhat less effective. We dated 6 or 7 times on Saturday nights between March and May 1959. 2 Sunday afternoons, on one of which she was housebound, nursing a cold, plus my junior prom, before she tired of me. I would have called her every night and talked till the conversion of the Jews, spent every Saturday night with her, and Sunday when I wasn't working, had the choice been mine. But it was not. Her father forbade her to date me more than once every other week, or speak to me by phone more than once every other night, for more than 10 to 15 minutes. There was not world enough and time. 50 years went by. I heard nothing from her, knew nothing about her, but she haunted every day. She drove me, the memory of her drove me. The thought that perhaps if I had been different, if I had a different experience, background, perhaps she could have cared for me. And then, by the sheerest chance, as I've explained, I met her again. Saw her name, met her. And this poem is about the first time I saw her again in 50 years. She came to lunch at Schoonerhead, my property in Maine. The title is Si Compte. The epigraph is from the Magic Flute. Es ist die Königin der Nacht. It's the Queen of the Night. She comes, trailing shadows never cast by any earthly forms, whose charge and mass thwart light. They flutter just beyond my grasp, like cherry pop blossoms, a puff of wind unclasps. She comes around the corner of the years, streaming faux memories from foreign peers that never were. Dreams I fear of unshared passages, landfalls, and tears. She comes, and for her breath regret unveils fantasy tableaus, our firstborn squall, trimming the sheets while I teach her to sail, her hand on mine before my father's fall. Phantoms spinning in the canyons of my night, no magic flute can pipe you to the light. And so, after that, 6 months later, she came back. I finally got over the anger I felt at first visit. And I saw her whenever I was in Maine, and came to know her. We came to know each other extremely well. And then cancer claimed her. And I was sick. These are 5 poems about that experience in a series called Deposition. Tumor. Surgeons probed the ruin that 6 weeks ago was a woman for the source of her nile pain. Raised ovaries through a keyhole, they proved benign. Twice hoovered her guts through a nasogastric hose, but still they fouled. Slit the abdomen at last, and from her colon cut the egg-sized ruby mass that damned her bowels. Post-op. In the room, scrubs come and go, check vital signs, the glucose drip, bring clear liquids for her to sip, but tell us nothing we want to know. Either side of the bed we stand, spin bad news into bland, walk off at times to hide, trembling lip, dampening eye, and dread the path report with furry hope to hell. Mid-morning, mid-afternoon, the scarecrow hanging on my arm shuffles speechless round the ward, while I hum Va Pensiero under my breath. Conjure the orchestra. Hear Nabucco's Hebrew slaves implore a God I'm certain is not there for strength to endure. Delphi. 9 stories up, the January sun fills the oncology waiting rooms. Lights pearwood chairs, beige carpets, off-white walls, and pencil-thin pale alopetes whose cadaverous flesh mocks the studied columns. Patient, daughter, and I sit, fidget, prattle, go for a pee, and feign no fear the news will be not what we want to hear. The haruspex enters quietly, half-tied surgical gown askew, scuffed brown wingtip shoes, a shambling, portly, distant man whose blank face, guarded gaze say he's acted the raven in 2 weekdays. You have stage 4 colon cancer. We couldn't find the source. The surgeon who removed the blockage thinks he got it all, but can't be sure. When you recover a little more, we'll do an endoscopy and PET scan, but I doubt they'll change our view. Chemotherapy is standard for what you have, a 6-month course if you can stand it. Then we review. What will the chemo do? Give you a year, maybe 2. Her late life only child turns aside to sob. I flinch, though the verdict's no surprise. And my wasted high school heartthrob, Tolax, mute, empty-eyed, decouples from us, and, like a stranger, boards her little black train. Totem taunts. Death settles on the exam table as the oncologist bids good day. Flutters anthracite feathers, eyes us, then with a nod, swings his new partner away. Wrapped in his grim wingspan, gyring down the shadow path, she pries at the talons that clamp her fast. With chemicals, diet, all she can muster to loosen them for a measure. Though nothing can ever dissever this pair from their round together. I am a wallflower at the dance, watching a lady slowly die. And as side treads on side, we play a 60-year-old teen romance. Coda. The epigraph is from Le Grand Monde by Alain Fournier. She paused, looking at him for a moment with a smile. My name? I am Mademoiselle Yvonne de Galais. Then she was gone. We trudged under the lash of measurement, each pulse a question. Will the next scan be clear? Pursued by odds we too soon hear, your cancer is fast treatment. Against that hour I sifted memory for the clarity a tango with extinction brings. Not the last 10 winter years when we grew close. Chance met again after half a century. But 3 months as your subject while you slummed it, a pubescent uptown rose, dallying with a bit of rough. I refined myself after that brief encounter. Quarried Wordsworth, Eliot, Lowell, Yeats, cast your deities as mine, pictured us kneeling at their shrine. But the conjunctive moment passed, worshipped alone. I'll sing no sad songs for you, my dearest. Now you are dead, Instead, for Kaddish will surrender the rage loving you engendered, and the stillborn dreams that drove me, Lee rail buried down the years. And the last poem wait a minute, you done the book? Okay. The last poem, you got it now? Okay. The last poem is called Bequest, the epigraph from La Traviata, almost the very last words Violetta sings. In Medinace, for the last time, she rose unaided from her bed. The ghost white cotton shift she wore 11 years before, when we watched the sun fire the Gulf of Maine at dawn, swamped her now, hem dragging the floor. 3 days later, she was dead. She grasped my forearms as I prepared to leave. Breathe, you are the center of my world. I love you. Her voice struggling from diaphragm through vocal cords and lips to speak those 10 last words. We shared no issue, no gold rings, no locket with her portrait in enameling, lay in some dresser to pass on. Breath was all she could bequeath, a confession that I played the lead in her final decade's mortality, a charm to keep the furies from me. Now she must lay that burden down. You are the center of my world. 3 days later, she lay dead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very, very much indeed. I'm just sorry that that after that we don't hear uproarious applause. It's so it's so strange, isn't it? Reading such moving and raw poems, raw truth, as you say, from Auerbach, unadorned but so tender, so unflinching, so truthful, and I think that requires a kind of guts nowadays. It's so easy to dissemble, and I think the human ear is so sort of attuned to rhythm and to rhyme. It's much. If you ever want to write a difficult poem, folks, write with rhythm and rhyme, because the ear hears every wrong foot you take.
Exactly.
So I've really enjoyed reading Dan's poem. Enjoyed is not quite the right word. They've struck me, sometimes forcibly, sometimes across the face, as it were. And I particularly asked him to read Deposition from the book Salvage at Twilight, because I was so struck by them. But there's many more. So do buy the book. Normally at poetryEast, we say Dan will be sitting next door, he'll be signing them for you. We've got books in the bookshop. We can't do any of that now. But these are his books with wonderful Auerbach on the front of We Look Like This and Salvage at Twilight. I'd really recommend that you buy them for their raw truthfulness, for their lyricism, for their honesty, and for that willingness to be an outsider, to just speak what poetry wants to speak, what you want to speak. So you can order that, you can get them direct from Cocknet, and of course you can get them from, some local bookshops are now sort of doing their own service, are they? I'm a bit nervous to recommend Amazon, but of course you can get them from Amazon. But I'd very much recommend that you read Dan's work. I think you'll be as struck by it as I have been and am. So thank you very much, Dan, for coming. As I say, I'm sorry that we can't all applaud But yeah, thank you very much for a wonderful interview and for your reading. Just to let people know, do join our PoetryEast mailing list. We're going to be actually from this week, we're going to start premiering some of the interviews that I've done before. So for instance, I'm going to premiere my interview with Anthony Gormley, the sculptor Anthony Gormley, Jory Graham, the Pulitzer Prize winning poet, Mark Doty, the American poet, and Michael Longley, the wonderful Irish poet. And what I've done, I've made little films to sort of say a little bit about what it was like meeting them. So we're going to be premiering those, I think, for a week on, for a few weeks, and then we'll probably do another batch. But let me just finish by thanking you again, Dan, for your wonderful prose writing and the wonderful poems, and for meeting you like this. I'm just sorry that it can't be actually in person, but I'm very, very pleased to meet you, Dan, and very, very pleased.
Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
See you later. Bye.
See you again soon.
Bart, we can sign off now.